I do feel like in the next 5 or 10 years, you're going to see a real increase in micro schools. And there's infrastructure being built now to make that happen. So a lot of states are passing, I think in the last 12 months, it was like 20 states passed some sort of either tax credit or education savings account. So states, policymakers are starting to create funding mechanisms to get your micro school to be funded outside of private tuition.
Have you ever dreamed of starting your own school? One where relationships matter more than red tape and innovation feels personal, not institutional? Well, welcome back to another episode of Shifting Schools. I'm your host, Jeff Utecht. And in today's episode, we dive into the growing world of micro schools with David Richards, CEO of Changemaker Education. You'll learn what defines a micro school, hint, think modern day one-room schoolhouse, how they're creating new work opportunities for educators, and why the pandemic may have just been the spark that launched a micro school movement. We also explore the practical pathways for teachers to become educational entrepreneurs and how small schools can have a huge impact. David's journey is anything but traditional, going from corporate banking to the classroom, to launching and scaling charter schools, and now empowering others to start their own micro schools across the United States. Through Changemaker Education, David is helping educators reimagine what's possible by guiding them through the process of launching learning-centered environments that truly serve communities. I hope you enjoyed this episode with David, all about micro schools and the micro school movement.
Hey listeners, a quick pause before we dive back in. Since all summer long, we are talking about the future world of work, we know any future is only possible when we help students face the challenges of the now. That's exactly why we want to tell you about something that's going to change the way you understand your students' lives. It comes from the groundbreaking group at Alongside, an AI-assisted mental health support tool built specifically for K-12 schools. And this summer, Shifting Schools listeners can be among the very first to access Alongside's brand new 2025 Youth Mental Health Report. It's packed with insights drawn from over 250,000 anonymous AI chats students had on Alongside's evidence-based platform over the past school year. Here's just a small glimpse of what you'll learn. Why teens say sleep is one of their biggest struggles. What's making school life balance feel impossible. The unexpected ways boys are learning to ask for help. Why confidential, self-guided AI tools resonate so strongly with students, and what the research is showing about how tools like this can be used in safe and effective ways. Want the report and bonus access to an exclusive webinar? Head to www.alongside.care/shifting to get on that list. We're proud to have Alongside as a sponsor this summer, and even prouder to help spotlight their work in reimagining student mental health. Check out the show notes to learn more, or head straight to www.alongside.care/shifting. And now, back to the conversation.
All right, welcome back to another episode of Shifting Schools. Excited today to have a conversation with David Richards, the CEO of Changemaker Education. We're going to be talking about micro schools today. David, welcome to the podcast. For a quick overview for our listeners, tell us a little bit about your background and where you are now.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thanks for having me, Jeff. So I actually started as a banker and was a corporate banker in DC. And when I turned 30, I was like, I cannot do this anymore. I got to go become a teacher. I always wanted to be a teacher, but I chose the banking career because it obviously, it supposedly was going to pay more money. But as I went through my education career, that didn't actually happen. So worked out well. I ended up going and teaching in Oakland, California, and then finding this great charter school, which we scaled from one school on the back of a parking lot to 10 schools across the San Francisco Bay Area. And then that model of Summit Public Schools is now in 300 schools across the country. Wow. They use the web platform. Yeah, so that was the best most exciting and crazy and exhausting 9 years of my career. But I
Yeah.
feel like everything I do now has been gleaned from that time. And then when I turned 40, we were chatting about the midlife crisis for our generation.
Yeah.
When I turned 40, I decided that I was like, okay, I supposedly made it in this like corporate. I was the chief of schools overseeing all the schools, and decided that I wanted to go back to the community and start my own charter school. So I started a charter school out here in Sacramento, California, K-8, and then did that for a few years. And then they had this anti-charter legislation that passed in 2018. So I decided that it was not the place for me anymore and started doing consulting. And then through my consulting practice, and I started helping people open micro schools and started to learn about micro schools. And I'd been kind of following them since I started my charter school almost 10 years ago, and just really fell in love with them for so many reasons, which I can get into as soon as we get going here.
No, and appreciate that. And I love the different ways we get to where we are today, right? And all the different businesses and ways that it goes. So it's very cool. Well, let's talk about this idea of micro schools. I'm very interested and would love to hear from our audience who's listening. If they've even heard of micro schools, it's a fairly new concept.
Yeah.
They've been around for a while, but we are seeing kind of an explosion of them. And here in our summer series around the future of work and what are some work opportunities for educators and for educators to be thinking about students of the future, I think this is a really interesting one to get into. So let's get started with, if you can kind of explain what is a micro school to our listeners.
Yeah, so it's exciting because there's now the National Microschooling Center, and I have a podcast called Changemaker EDU, and I had the director on a few years ago, and he kind of got me really excited about microschools. But the way he talks about it, and they do reports, which is really awesome, so you can go onto their website and check it out. But he says that they've defined a microschool as 5 to 150 students. Okay. So what that means is like a homeschool with you and 3 or 4 kids in your house, or like a family of 5, that's considered a microschool. To like, a small building with 150 kids in a small schoolhouse. The other thing about micro schools is that they're not, so it's really defined by the size. That's what makes it a micro school. That said, you could have a charter micro school, you could have a district micro school, you could have a private micro school. Most of them, looking at the reports, are private micro schools, but I think about 10% are done in district schools and about 10% in charter schools. So about 80% private. So, but it's really depending on the size is what makes it a micro school. And it's the interesting thing is what's old is new, right? So this is the redux of the one-room schoolhouse. My mother-in-law, my mother-in-law grew up in rural Nebraska, and she's like, you realize it's not innovation, right? This is the country school that I went to. So it's really about...
It's called a one-room schoolhouse. We just now call them micro schools.
Sounds cooler, right? This is what we do as humans. So anyway, that's kind of the working definition of a micro school. And it's like a newer movement in terms of it's old, but it's a newer movement. So I think we're defining it and figuring out, which is why I'm excited that we kind of have these structures that are putting us in and kind of giving us credibility.
Have we really seen them explode since the pandemic? Is this one of those things that the pandemic really allowed to kind of come to light, and we're seeing a move forward into micro schools?
Yeah, I think the pandemic opened people's eyes of kind of what's happening with traditional school in general, like especially parents started to, and teachers are like, what is happening here? And I think people really started to reflect on like what they're doing and what's happening with schools. I think especially for parents, they started to see that there's maybe a different option. The homeschool market in the last 5 years doubled, I think from like 4 to 8% or 5 to 10, something around that. So still a small percentage, but it's doubled in the last 5 years. So I think the pandemic really opened people's eyes and started to like really explode. And then they had this kind of, I don't know if you remember this, but they had the kind of pod thing where people would go out and hire a teacher to teach 5 kids in there with their little bubble. And I think that kind of started that move. A lot of micro schools opened out of that, and then it took off from there.
So can you kind of talk about like, what is the structure of a micro school? The idea of a one-room schoolhouse, are these certified teachers then that are coming in, and do you need to be certified in basically all subject areas? Because you're teaching, you might be having, 15 kids between the grades of 4 and 11.
So what's really interesting about micro schools is any movement, there's so many different variations. So there are a lot of micro schools that have been opened by educators, and they're teaching as certified teachers. There's also a lot of micro schools get opened by homeschool parents, and they're not certified teachers, right? And so we're kind of figuring out right now. And interestingly enough, my friend has a micro school in South Dakota, and she said her best teacher right now is actually the one who's not certified, the one that's a nurse, because there's a lot of things that we have to unlearn and undo about the traditional model that you're not seeing in a small micro school.
Sure. Right. That makes sense. Right. Like if you're used to, if you're a trained teacher and you're used to, teaching 15 years in a public school system, there's a lot to unlearn in the way that you create these new school systems. So is there a lot of flexibility then around the idea of what it is to be a teacher in these schools, or what are you held to a state standard? Do states have standards then? Is it fall like
Yeah.
under a homeschooling?
It's a great question, and it's
Thing?
kind of changing as we speak and state by state, which is, again, it kind of reminds me of the charter school movement that I started in the early 2000s. It's
Yeah.
like it's this thing that's really is taking off. People are excited, families are excited, educators are excited, and then after a few years, they start to build more regulatory frameworks and more kind of rules and stuff like that. So I think the micro school space is in that now, but really it's dictated by whether you do a private micro school and become a homeschool learning center, or whether you do a private and become a private school. So and then whether you take money from the state, like a voucher or an education savings account, or if you go charter school, right? So it's, if you think about it on a spectrum, it's like the one side would be it's a private micro school. We're not taking any any public money or any kind of, we're not going to get accredited. We're just going to go private, maybe do like a homeschool learning center.
Mm-hmm.
Then there's not much regulation on that. Most states, right?
Yeah.
And then if you go to the other side, like, okay, we're taking education savings accounts are going to pay for like 70% of the tuition. Now you're being held to certain standards that the Department of Education of the state is going to hold you to, like any private school, like standardized testing or any of those kind of things.
Very cool. Are you finding them? Are we in all 50 states yet? Are micro schools kind of popping up everywhere because every state can, to your point, can kind of fit it under this homeschooling kind of umbrella?
Yeah. Definitely in all 50 states. There's a lot of micro schools I don't think we know about. Like we said, like the school that hasn't been reported, but we know of 125,000 micro schools with about 1.5 million students, which means micro schools has the same number of students as Catholic schools right now. Which is, I love that, sharing that fact, because it's like, wow, we all know Catholic schools, but we're talking about 1.5 million and growing, right? Yeah. And it gets, the movement is exploding. And so we have Changemaker Education, which I started because of the fact that I was getting so many phone calls from friends, family members, educators, like, we want to do a micro school, or like, what do? We don't want to put our kids in a traditional school anymore, but we don't have the capacity to homeschool. I'm like, that's where micro schools come in. You can go and find some friends. And then I realized that there's like there's a sustainability around creating a micro school that stays open. And then there's like kind of a gap of people wanting to do it and not knowing how. So that's why we created Changemaker Education. But we're trying to create a structure for people so they can say like, hey, I want to do this. And now we can give you a pathway and the support to get it done.
That's great. So talk to me a little bit, with this summer series that we're doing about talking about the future of work. When we think about the work that you do, where do you see the micro school movement going, say, in the next decade? And if there is a teacher listening to this saying, you know what, this sounds like something my community could use, or this is something I'm interested in, how education support a teacher or support a parent wanting to set up a micro school?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. I mean, obviously none of us can predict the future, but I do feel like in the next 5 or 10 years, you're going to see a real increase in micro schools, and there's infrastructure being built now to make that happen. So a lot of states are passing, I think in the last 12 months, it was like 20 states passed some sort of either tax credit or education savings account. So states, policymakers are starting to create funding mechanisms to get your micro school to be funded outside of private tuition. And there's a lot of things like me and organizations like us that are starting to, incubators and different things that are helping you do it. So I think in the next 5 years, you're going to see, I would say like 10 times increase. Like it's probably going to be, and I would say 10 years, it'll be closer to 10 million students in micro schools. And you'll start seeing district schools. What happened in charters is districts started creating more schools of choice, more open enrollment. And so I think you'll see that. I don't think you'll see charter schools coming in. I think a lot of people will start to see what's happening with micro schools. And I think families will get really excited. And then there'll be more infrastructure, more systems, more frameworks that allow them to thrive. So I think at least 10x, maybe even like 20x.
Wow. Yeah. And I'm already thinking of some micro schools. I've been doing a lot of work up in Alaska, and some of them are already micro schools, right? They're like four teachers and 22 kids in a out in a rural village somewhere. It's K through 12.
Yep.
So talk a little bit about how Changemaker Education, the support that you give, if somebody wants to set up a micro school, what does that look like?
Yeah. And I was going to say with the last question, teachers, if you're interested in doing a micro school, So when I put that, so we have our first cohort of launching schools in August. And when I put this out on LinkedIn and kind of started, reaching out to my network, I was just inundated with interest. So we got 2,500 applicants in 3 months, and we ended up narrowing it down. I talked to 250 people and narrowed it down to like 12 founders, but everybody was me because people are really excited about this. So if you're a teacher that's sitting there right now saying like, I just feel like I could do this in a way that I really want to do it. I don't want to deal with the red tape. I don't want to deal with the bureaucracy. Like, I just want to serve kids, and I don't want to have to deal with, mandated curriculum and command and control bosses and principals, changing superintendents, changing school boards, all the things that happen in like a traditional school district. I just want to go and work with kids. Then yeah, you can go to changemakereducation.com, and then we will literally give you the roadmap and the support. So, coaching and resources and all the things you need, all the business stuff you don't understand, like how do I do an entity formation for an LLC or a nonprofit? How do I deal with insurance? Like all that stuff that stresses you out, we'll give you all of that. And then you just get to go and open a micro school for your community and work with the kids that you want to serve, the ages you want to serve. And you get it nice and small, and you build it, and it's just so exciting.
Yeah, that's very, very cool. What are some great stories maybe that you can share that you've heard that have come out from some of these micro schools, or even just something to kind of get people help understand kind of what can be in these micro school kind of formats and areas?
Yeah, I think what can happen, and every educator will understand this, because you ask a teacher what's their dream, and they'll be like, well, my dream would be to have one-to-one, like one student.
Or like
Everyone,
five,
yeah, it's like they say 5. Like really, it's 1, right? If you could just have one every 10 minutes or whatever. But the point is, yes, small numbers of kids, right? And so micro schools allow you to reach that dream. Because why do we answer that as educators? Because we want to really get to know them. We want to spend the time to support them. We want to understand what they need. We want to be able to deliver a more personalized curriculum. We want to be able to understand what's stressing them out, why they're not learning today, all the things, right? We want to build relationships. So micro schools allow you to do all of those things. And so one example, and then when you create an environment where kids are in an intimate, strong community with strong relationships and great teachers and great adults that care about you, we all know as educators, that's where everybody thrives. So now you get to do it in a micro school, which means you've eliminated so many of the problems. So a great story I would share is my friend who opened in South Dakota. She talks about a first grader who walked in completely beaten down by school in first grade. He was ADHD, super high, that typical story, like hyperactive. Parents were just so stressed out because every day teacher would be calling and saying, he's a problem child, he's a behavior child, take away his recess, he's coming in here at lunch. You're going to have to come and sit with him now. Kind of that typical story of the kid that doesn't necessarily fit in. And she has a nature-based micro school that's pretty much outside. And she opened it right outside of the Native American reservation she grew up on. So it's serving like a real interesting, community that's been underserved for years. And this kid's now, it's one story I always tell, because he's now like the poster child for their micro school. Wow. He's not a problem child anymore. He's totally thriving. His parents aren't crying every day about what the heck they're going to do about their problem child. And so when I read her testimonial, I'm like, I'm going to be sharing that on every podcast I ever go on, because it is the power of a micro school, is the kid that would have gone through that system for so many years and would have come out thinking something was wrong with them. And now they're in a place where they're actually thriving.
That's so cool. And that's the power of intimate relationships in schools. And you're right. That is what teachers are striving for constantly in the systems that we're in. You told us at the beginning, you've had a lot of different roles and have gone through a couple different transitions. There's an educator that's listening to this thinking, you know what, I would love to look into this, but I really don't even know about what skills are needed or kind of what are needed. As somebody who's, gone through, multiple organizations and started different companies, that entrepreneurship idea. Yeah. What are some of the skills that you say are really needed, or somebody would have to maybe reflect on to be ready to a micro school or maybe head into this direction?
Yeah, what I always share is that teachers don't realize how many transferable skills they actually have, right? Yeah. I came in from banking and then I became a teacher, and it's like, you're a salesperson. You're selling a 5th grader on math. You're selling a 9th grader on science, right? You have great interpersonal skills because all you do all day, every day is with kids and parents at some point. And so there's so many transferable skills that I always say, you have so many transferable skills. Like you're a project manager, right? Teachers do everything. Like when I was in the banking world, it's like, oh, you need an assistant for that. You need this, we do everything. We're going to make the copies. We're going to organize the desks. We're going to do everything, right? And so you have all these transferable skills. You have the grit, the entrepreneurship, because you know how to start something and get it finished. And for me personally, I really focused every time I switched. I didn't even mention that I did life coaching for about 4 years too, in between during the pandemic when people were really struggling. But I always leaned on the skills that I had that were most natural to me. Right. So I've always been a teacher and a mentor in some way, shape, or form. When I was in the bank, I taught English as a second language at nights to Ethiopian immigrants in DC. And I also coached basketball at the YMCA. Right. So I've always had this interest for mentoring and coaching and teaching, and it's taken on many different forms. When I was an executive, I was coaching other leaders. When I was a teacher, I was teaching, so you think about what the through line in your life is that really is your greatest strength and what makes you the happiest. And then it's just like, you're just changing the forms. You're like, oh, I'm not teaching ninth grade history like I did. Now I'm teaching somebody who's in the pandemic and totally struggling, and we're going to talk about how to help them through their life. Or now I'm teaching people how to open a micro school. And so if you stay with that, and then you remind yourself that you have so many amazing skills that people will pay a lot of money for and you don't even realize it, then you'll find your way.
Ooh, I love that. I love that. I agree with you too. I mean, I think teachers make some of the best. I really do think there's a lot of different skill sets that, much like you mentioned, that teachers have that we just don't think of that. We're just like, yeah, I know how to build a curriculum. Well, if you know how to build a curriculum, you know how to build a lot of stuff.
Exactly.
Right?
It's not easy.
You just know how to do things. And a lot of it is transferable if you can just figure out how to tweak it your way a little bit. Well, thank you so much for being on the website is changemakereducation.com. We'll make sure there's a link to that over in the show notes. When you get over there, if a teacher heads over to your website, where should they start? What do you think is the starting point for them?
Yeah, I think the best place to go is obviously read over kind of what the program offers and what we do. And then we are launching our we're launching our fall cohort to launch their schools, your micro school, in fall of 2026. And we're looking at all 50 states. So whatever state you're in, we'll talk to you. We're really just looking for great people that have a vision for creating amazing micro schools. So I would say just click on that link that shows where you go to apply, and then, or just reach out to us, and the emails all go to me, and I'll reach back out to you and we can have a conversation about whether it's a good fit.
Awesome. Again, that makereducation.com. We'll make sure there's a link to that in the show notes. You mentioned about being on LinkedIn and social. I take it you're probably everywhere on the socials too. People can reach out, learn more, follow you there. LinkedIn seems to be where everybody's kind of gone lately.
I know, it's crazy. Yeah.
It's kind of interesting, with Twitter/X doing what it's doing. Everybody's kind of moved over to LinkedIn.
Yeah, for sure.
That's been a very fascinating kind of a transition. I think that everybody was trying to wonder where we would end up.
It's really interesting. Yeah, it's true.
But that's great. Well, David, thank you so much for being here today, talking about micro schools. I think it's an interesting movement that, to your point, we're going to continue to see evolve in some ways. We to your point, schools, I think it really made public schools reflect and even start their own schools, or we started project-based learning schools, or smaller high schools. There's all kinds of that kind of came out of that movement. It's going to be interesting to see how we as a public start to transition with this next movement, even maybe getting smaller and a little more pinpointed on meeting the individual needs of students. So it's a great time, I think, to be talking about this, and for educators just to know what's out there and know that there's an opportunity for you, for students that are popping up everywhere, and something for us to look into. So thank you so much for your time today.
Yeah, thank you, Jeff.